Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to see everyone chatting and just introducing yourselves in the chat box. We're excited to see folks from all over the country, outside of the country. Again, thank you so much for taking time this afternoon, this morning, this evening, depending where you're joining us from for this webinar. My name is Arlene Vassell. I am the Vice President of Programs, Prevention, and Social Change for the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Again, thank you for joining and welcome to our webinar titled Dealing with Loss and Uncertainty, Self-Compassion, Resilience, and Narrative, Part 1 of the Self-Care and Healing, Surviving and Thriving in the Midst of a Pandemic, a Community Response to Loss and Grief to COVID-19 webinar series. And Yvonne just gave you the information, and Brecken in the chat box gave you some additional information about the webinar series. I would like to welcome our amazing presenters, my sisters, my colleagues, Gia Kelly and Carolina Bautista-Velez. They'll be presenting the information today, and I'm really excited to hear from them, and I'm really excited for you to hear from them as well. Gia Kelly is a faith leader, visionary, and social justice advocate. A native of Miami, Florida, she has a passion for empowering individuals and helping them reach their maximum potential, both naturally and spiritually. Gia is the founder and CEO of the Gift of Truth Incorporated, a faith-based organization and ministry that seeks to create opportunities and safe spaces for individuals to learn, heal, and grow. She is also a certified life coach, trainer, and public speaker with expertise in several areas such as domestic violence, sexual violence, emotional health, racial equity, systems change, and spiritual identity and purpose. Gia holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Management, a master's degree in clinical social work, and she is currently pursuing her doctorate in transformational leadership. Ooh, Dr. G, I love it. Dr. Kelly. She is an ordained elder and has dedicated her life to empowering women, advocating against injustice, and ministering to the whole person, body, soul, and spirit. Gia resides in Tallahassee, Florida, with her husband and her 3 beautiful children. Carolina Bautista-Velez is a certified professional coach, consultant, and mindfulness teacher with over 17 years of professional experience. She is the owner of Velez Consulting and Metamorphosis Coaching. Carolina, I'm sorry if I messed that up. Carolina's work is rooted on social justice, cultural humility, and anti-oppression frameworks. As a certified life coach, Carolina offers a space to cultivate reflection, resilience, autonomy, and strength, where her clients can focus on learning sustainable tools to navigate desires, social conditioning, goals, and difficulties. Carolina has been an advocate for survivors of domestic and sexual violence for many years, providing direct services, creating programs for human trafficking survivors, and training organizations across the country on how to provide social justice and cultural informed services to survivors. Carolina holds a degree in clinical psychology with a specialization in social psychology. She is an immigrant, Latinx, social changer who believes in the power of individual and collective liberation. Now we'd like to learn more about you, and you've shared a lot of information with us about where you're joining from. If you haven't yet, introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from. Gia will now begin her presentation, and Carolina will follow directly after. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I'm excited about our presenters.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world. It is truly my honor to be able to be here and just to share with you all what's in my heart, because I think that, we focus so much on so many other things, and so today we get a time to really focus on ourselves and our health and our healing as a people. And so Arlene has done an amazing job of reading our bios, but really simply, I am an advocate at heart. That is the work that is core to my being. So even though I'm not currently in the movement, advocacy is something that you become. It's not something that you do. And so as you can see from this slide, I've, worked in the movement for a long time. So I am, at home amongst advocates, many of you all I see from domestic violence centers and shelters and coalitions all around the nation. And so I am at home with you all. But alongside that, what keeps me grounded as well is my belief. It's my belief system, the core of who I am. And so today, don't worry, I won't be preaching to anyone, but I will be sharing just some tools on how do we make it through this time that we have found ourselves in. And so before we get started and dig in a little deep into this, I want to have a moment of reflection because a lot has transpired in our nation and our world, quite frankly. And over the past 4 months, there has been literally a whirlwind, right, that has happened to us from COVID to Black Lives Matter to the protesting to the loss of a sense of safety, to racism, to Breonna Taylor, to protests, to riots, to mask wearing, to not being able to go to Walmart each and every day or whatever it is that you do, working from home, homeschooling. All of these things have now become the new norm for us. And so I want us to kind of ground ourselves and really reflect on that for just a moment and just really kind of take that in, that this is where we are. And because it's where we are, it is imperative that we embrace that so that we can begin to move forward. I know that many of you all are at different places in this process, right? Some of us are still trying to wrap our heads around it. Some of us have not been able to really sit still. Some of us have sat still and have been able to process a bit, further than others, and that's okay. We're all at different places. But I want to take a moment and just kind of embrace that, a moment of silence, if you will, just to kind of take these things in. Just a nice deep exhale. All right. So now we can move forward. So we are truly in unprecedented times in which we live. And so some of the things that I've identified that you all can probably identify with as well is that, we have experienced as a nation, as a world, significant loss. And loss is really self-defined. And we'll talk a little bit more about loss, particularly how to deal with loss as it relates to grieving. But we've experienced a loss. And even as I'm talking, if you all want to just chat in some of the ways that you may have experienced loss during this time. And there's, again, a whole number of things that we can identify, but feel free to chat in whatever you feel comfortable sharing as it relates to loss. But loss is definitely something significant that has happened to us. Alongside loss is uncertainty, right? Is what's going to happen. Like there's question marks all over. When do we go back to work? When do things return normal? When do our children go back to school and be safe? There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of uncertainty around this pandemic, around the racial tension that we're sensing in our state that has not been something that people of color that we have ever lost sight of. But now we see that our nation has now begun to understand that systemic racism is still very much alive, that in many instances it is not overt, but it is there. And so we have to also embrace that, right? Okay, I see some of you all chatting in, and I want to honor some of the losses, moments of freedom, feeling safe, absolutely, loss of time with family and friends, losing family members, right? Man, it's just so much. So thank you all sharing, losing just a sense of just being with other people. You know, some people have not seen their family members in a long time, and so we want to honor that is a significant loss. Uncertainty, reflection. So one thing you'll learn about me is that I'm always looking for the positive in any situation, and so I will not say that this pandemic has not proven to be very difficult. I would not put on to say that dealing with racism as a person of color has not been daunting, has not been exhausting, having to educate people on the challenges that we face and the disparities that are faced. However, in the midst of every situation, I believe that there is always opportunity. Okay, I want to make sure that I put that. I am a person full of hope, and I believe that hope is what keeps me going. And so by the end of my 30 minutes with you all, I hope that hope is what you are left with. If nothing else, if you don't remember my name or you don't remember anything I said, if I can just leave you all with hope, then I have done what I've come to do. And so this pandemic has also forced us to begin to reflect, right? Many of you all, I probably can see virtually start shaking your head like I have had a moment of reflection, because this pandemic and being on shutdown and not being able to do the things that we have typically done has helped us to really reflect on our lives, right? To begin to think about what is important, because I don't know about you all, but for me, I was so busy in doing life, right, that I didn't have time to really reflect on what is important to me, to reflect on where I am in my life and what I am doing moving forward. And so this pandemic and this being at home and still has caused me to reflect on the status of our nation, right? To reflect on the things that grieve me, to reflect on the future for my children in this nation. So reflection is a huge piece of this process as well. And then lastly, during this time, there has been a sense of reprioritization. You have had to reprioritize your life. That, you know, where there was a sense of a daily routine, that routine has now been interrupted, right? And so now we have to prioritize and reprioritize what is important to us. And so for me personally, I have had to reprioritize family. I have had to reprioritize my own self-care and health and well-being. I have had to reprioritize even my values as it concerns. And also, I have had to reprioritize my advocacy and the things that I invest my energy in, because I believe that as an advocate, you don't necessarily advocate for everything at the same time. There are seasons for certain things to take precedence. And so in this time, I've had to reprioritize that. And so you all may be able to identify with that as well, having to reprioritize. And if you want to give some examples in the chat, please feel free to do so, of ways that you had to reprioritize things because we have been interrupted. So there has been some loss, some uncertainty, some reflection, and most importantly, some reprioritization. So the next thing, as we explore loss is a very difficult thing, but it is a part of life. The more you live, you will experience loss. Some of us have experienced more loss than others. Some of us have experienced, loss very early in our lives. Some of us have not experienced a lot of loss, and that is beautiful. But at some point in our lives, we all will experience loss. And so the thing about loss is that if you experience loss, it is absolutely a natural response to grieve that loss. And so I want to help to identify for some of you all where you are emotionally, because some of you all, like me, may be in a point where you just feel emotionally overwhelmed, or there may be a sadness there, right? There may be a sense of feeling alone, feeling lost. And for some of you all, it is because you are grieving the losses that we've identified a few moments back. You're grieving the loss of your sense of safety. We are grieving the loss of even feeling safe in our country, right? For people of color, there is a grieving of not being able to be in relationship with our coworkers on a daily basis. There is a sense of grieving just the idea that we were further along in our nation than we are. There is a grieving that is happening collectively amongst us all, and grief is natural. For many of us, there is this desire to suppress grief, but that, in fact, is unhealthy, right? Because grief is a natural response. It is a healthy response. And so although there is no right or wrong way to grieve, there are healthy ways to grieve. And so I want to give you the space and the encouragement to grieve this time, to grieve what you have lost, to grieve where you are emotionally, and to be okay with that. And most importantly, not to rush yourself through your grieving process. If you all have ever dealt with a loss of a loved one, and that grieving process can be very difficult, but it is different for every person. Some people grieve in a certain amount of time and they go through a certain process, and other people, it may take a longer time. So it's okay if you don't grieve in the same way that another person grieves, but you have to grieve, right? You have to grieve. And so some of the losses that we've seen, as you all have already identified, is the loss of loved ones who have died from COVID, who have been sick, or even the near-death experiences, or just seeing the amount of death on our news and seeing the way that people of color have been disproportionately affected by this virus, right? Other losses include losses of jobs and financial stability because of the way that this has now impacted our economic system. And so many people are left, grieving the loss of maybe a career that they have built, or maybe your significant other may have lost their job. And so you're grieving with them during that time. You can grieve the loss of a cherished dream. Maybe the dream, was that, for racial reconciliation. And now you're realizing that that is a little bit further in the future than it is right now. And so we grieve that loss, that we are in a place of progression in the area of racism. And then to now realize that Black and brown bodies are being killed at numbers that are alarming. And so having to grieve that, grieving for our Black and brown children and our boys, as they navigate this scary world, that is a loss, and that's something to be grieved. And then lastly, the loss of safety, just not feeling safe. I mean, the mask is that we wear is to keep us from the virus. But you all, there is another loss of safety that we are experiencing as well. And as a Black woman, I can tell you that I don't feel safe. And we all know that in this movement to end violence against women, women have dealt with this all of our lives, is this sense of not feeling safe in certain environments. And so now that has been heightened because not only am I feeling unsafe for being a woman, but I'm also feeling unsafe because of the color of my skin. And it is not always that someone will take my life, but it's just a lack of safety or security in feeling equal, right? That is also a loss of safety, that I don't feel safe in majority white spaces because I do not feel necessarily like I'm accepted. So it's not always a fear of death or impending, harm to my physical body, but sometimes our spirit can also feel unsafe because we know that we are not experiencing the same level of opportunity and equality that other people are experiencing. And so we have to grieve that. That is a lot right there, right? That is a lot to take in. But the beautiful thing about grief is that there is a process, there is a beginning, and there is an end. And so the sooner you allow yourself to grieve, the sooner you can reach the place of what we call acceptance. It doesn't mean that it goes away. It doesn't mean that it's not painful anymore, but there is a place of healing. There is a place of being able to move beyond it. And so we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And I love the conversation that is happening in the chat room, that you all are amening me. I know I'm a minister, so I love the amens and all of that good stuff. But I see that you all hear my heart, right? That the sense of safety is huge. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that people are grieving, but they cannot put language to their grief. And that too is okay, because when you don't necessarily know why you're grieving, you have to trust that your body knows. And so I'm going to give some tools on how to press into that a bit, because we have to listen to our bodies. We have to understand that when we don't have language, our body, our hearts, our souls, and our spirits, they have language, okay? All right. And so I want to move into a very familiar model. I'm a clinically trained social worker. And so some of you all may be as well, or therapists. I know that our next presenter is a psychologist, and so there may be other clinicians as well. But some of you all may be very familiar with the stages of grief, and there are different variations of this model. Some have added to it, but I just wanted to acknowledge just a very basic framework for us looking at the stages of grief. And this is what's called the Kubler-Ross model. And so there's 5 identified stages. And again, as you Google this or do your research, there's a lot more. Some people have added more stages to it, have tweaked the language. But for this presentation, I want to look at these 5 because I think that they will give us some level of framework to use as we look at our grieving process. And so the first stage that you're going to see is what we call denial. Denial, and some of us may be in that stage, and that's okay because it too is a part of the process. And denial really says, this is not really happening. That's what denial sounds like. This cannot be happening to me. I cannot be in this place. Our nation is not in this place. That man did not kill that man in broad daylight in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That did not happen to Breonna Taylor. That did not happen to Ahmaud Arbery. This can't be where we are. Our president did not say that. Okay. Y'all get what I'm saying, right? I am in denial that we are in this place. I am not ready to embrace that our ancestors marched and picketed and lost their lives. I'm almost getting emotional. For us to still be where we are. Right? This is not what our white allies joined the picket lines for. This is not what my ancestors picked cotton for. For us to be still trying to achieve the American dream, whatever that is. That we are not still in a place where blacks and brown people and transgendered people and all different kind of people with different levels of ability, that we are not looked at and valued as human. We can't still be there. We can't still be there. So denial is a part of this process, right? I will not accept it. I will not accept that this is where we are. The other thing that comes out of denial, that next stage, is anger. And some of you all, I already feel it. Some of you all are there. I go in and out sometimes. I go from being very sad. I go then to being pissed off. Because now it's not that I'm denying it, right? I'm mad about it. I realize that this is really happening. I'm realizing that our black men are being hunted like animals, and I'm pissed off about it. I'm mad that, okay, I'm the only one, right? I'm mad, and I have a right to be, because I don't feel safe anymore. And I don't know what the world will look like in the next 20 years for my young children. I do not know what next week holds as it relates to the coronavirus and where our nation is going. I do not know what the next presidential election holds. I don't know. And so I'm angry about that. And some of that anger is because we do not have the amount of control to really, or feel like we have the control to change anything. And so anger is a part of the grieving process. Angry because we don't know what the future holds. That's right. So anger is a key part of this process. And if you're angry, that's okay. The next stage is bargaining. So we go from denying it to not wanting to accept it. We step into anger, right? And then there's a bargaining that happens. And bargaining sounds like, man, if only I would have, ... Or God, if you can change this situation, I promise, ... You fill in the blank. It's a bargaining. Like if I can just wake up and this be a bad dream, right? Yeah. Like I'll do anything to get out of this, like for this not to be my reality. Okay? And then there's depression. And I prefer to use sadness instead of depression, but that is what the model calls it. And for some, depression is something that they struggle with. I know for some it may be hard to say that or not want to voice to depression or, not to want to feel like your level of sadness meets the clinical definition of depression. But this is not necessarily talking about a mental health type of depression. It's just a feeling of immense sadness. And so it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to have this sense of sorrow, right, for where we are. Yeah. It's okay to want to be there for a minute, and it's healthy to be there. And then the last stage is acceptance. And for some, when you're in the denial stage, acceptance may seem so far away, right? It can seem so far away. But acceptance is a place, it's a process there. And I was just about to clarify, and I see that, Casey, you've already stated this in the chat. But the reason why I use this particular graphic is because it shows that there is an interweaving that between these stages. And so this is not a linear process. You can go from denial to bargaining to acceptance back to anger. There's no cyclical way that this happens. So you can go from one stage to the next. There are some that have felt like, they've gone from anger to depression and then back to, so it really depends on your process. So there is not one way to do this. So thank you for clarifying that. So wherever you find yourself in the process, just know that there is an end, and that you take your time to get there. However long it takes, you get there, but you have to press into it and lean into it and not be afraid to sit alone and really hear what your heart has to say. I'll say that again. Sometimes you cannot be afraid to sit in silence, to sit alone with yourself so that you can hear what your heart has to say. And so my question that I want to pose is, what story are you telling yourself? We have a lot of narratives that are going forward. MSNBC has a narrative. Fox, I'm not really a news person, but whatever your favorite news outlet is. Social media has a narrative that's being told. The Republicans have a narrative. The Democrats have a narrative. The Christians have a narrative. I mean, everybody has a narrative. But what's most important is what narrative you are telling yourself. And so we cannot allow outside influences to shape our narrative of what we tell, the story that I'm telling Gia. Okay? What are you telling you? What story are you believing? And so that's why the self-care and the pressing in to hearing what your heart and your spirit is saying is so important, so that you can also evaluate the narrative that you have believed. All right? And so it is important that you narrate your own story. Are you telling yourself a story of fear and anxiety and doom and gloom, or are you telling yourself a story of hope? And so what that looks like is, the story of fear is saying, this will never get better. It really goes back to that self-talk. I'm saving you all a copay on therapy, y'all. This is all it is learning how to change your thought pattern. And so your narrative for fear and anxiety is, this is it. This will never get better, right? There's no way out of this. COVID is going to kill everybody. We're never going to reach a place of racial reconciliation. Black folks will never be equal. So that's the narrative that now breeds fear and anxiety and hopelessness, right? But the narrative of hope says, this is a really bad time, but things are going to get better. I choose to believe that things are going to get better. I have to believe that this is not the end. I have to believe that our political climate will get better, that empathy will begin to penetrate our political system. I choose to believe that women, hallelujah, will be empowered. Y'all see me? And will it be empowered in some way? I choose to believe that there will be equality among blacks and whites and our Latin brothers and sisters. I choose to bring forth a message of hope to myself, right? And so you have to ask yourself, what story am I believing? What story am I telling myself? What story am I allowing others to tell me? Because you can choose whether you embrace the story or the narrative of others or you reject it, right? Okay, good. So you have to check your personal narrative. And this is a quote that I think is very befitting, and it says, it is the story of self-narrative that determines the shape of the expression of our lived experience. All right? And so what that is saying in very plain language is that your how you feel and how you behave is directly connected to the story that you tell yourself. The way that we feel and we behave is directly connected to what we tell ourselves. So you have to check your narrative. And it's okay to have a moment where you're in a sucky mood. It's okay to want to whine and complain. That is your business. But we cannot stay in that place of hopelessness. We cannot stay in that place of defeat and discouragement. We have to pull ourselves up pull ourselves out of it and begin to instill in us a sense of hope. Our ancestors could not stay in their ruts, right? They did not, Harriet Tubman did not create, the system of freedom that she did for so many people by staying in a place of despondency, and there was no hope. There had to be a vision of hope. Dr. Martin Luther King had to have a vision of hope that continuously led him through the difficult times. And so you too have to have a vision of hope that things will get better. I will find employment. I will get out of this. I will move forward. I will get the strength that I need to come up out of this. So it's about your narrative. And this is really simple. What are you choosing to wear, guys? Are we wearing our faith? And for me, my faith is my belief in a higher power in God. But your faith may be in whatever it is that you put your hope in. Are you choosing to wear that, or are you choosing to wear fear? Every day we have to get up and make a decision to dress according to our narrative. And I thought that this was very powerful in that it showed these things in a T-shirt form, because it shows us that the faith that we employ or the fear that we employ, they have the ability to clothe us. They become a part of us. They become our outward expression. And so we have to now make a very conscious decision. Am I going to clothe myself in fear, in worry, and anxiety? Or am I going to clothe myself in faith, believing that the impossible is possible, believing that things will get better? So we have to choose what we wear. This speaks for itself. Fear is a liar. That is just so powerful to me. And again, we understand that we work with women who know fear, right? We have worked with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, so we're not minimizing fear as in the fear that protects us when we are in a place of danger. But what I am talking about is the fear that paralyzes us, the unhealthy fear. So fear can either protect us or it can paralyze us. And so we should never want to operate in a level of fear that keeps us from moving forward to the things that are important to us. And so I'm not talking about, again, fear that genuinely comes out of a response of being in danger. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about the unhealthy fear that comes to keep us from moving forward and keeps us from opening our mouths and advocating, that keeps us from speaking out against injustice, that keeps us from really moving forward in the way that we should go. All right? So fear is a liar. And some of you all have already said it, but Carolina says it, that fear is false information appearing real. Absolutely. That was one of the things that I was going to state, is that it's false information that is appearing real. And I'm going to give you all this for free. But in order to conquer fear, right, you must identify and uproot the lie that you believe. So when you find yourself dealing with fear, you have to go back. Again, we're going back into that place of self, really sitting with ourselves, right, and really evaluating where we are. And go back and try to pinpoint what lie did I believe along the way that caused fear and anxiety to now breed in my life. And again, I'm not talking about the fear that may be clinically diagnosed or the anxiety, but you all get where I'm going with this. And so I want to clarify that. But if you want to conquer this unhealthy sense of fear, then you need to go back and identify and uproot, right, with the truth, the lie that you believe. And so it could be a simple lie, like things won't ever get better. I got to go back and undo that and put the truth. No, I put hope there. Things will get better. I don't know when, but I believe that it will. All right? So we are wrapping up, and the last thing that I want to give you all is just some strategy for maintaining your personal peace. It is so important in these times that while we cannot control, what is going on in our nation, while we can't control how people feel about us and think about us, what we can control is our own space. We can control our own narrative, and we can take control of our own peace. And so these are just some really simple strategies that you all can employ in your time of reflection. And so the first one is shift your focus. Shift your focus. What you feed is what will grow. So ask yourself, what is my diet? What am I feeding on? What am I focusing my affections on? What am I spending most of my time consuming? Because what you focus on is what will grow. So we want to shift our focus from doom and gloom to a more positive, healthy way of viewing things. The next thing is self-care. Take care of yourself, guys. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself a break. Give yourself a hug. Give yourself a pat on the back because you're really doing an amazing job. You're holding it all together. I have 3 children, y'all. Y'all know I'm not okay with the homeschool, but I have to pat myself on the back every now and then because I'm doing the best that I can with what I have. So be good to yourself. The next thing is be grateful. Gratitude is an amazing way to keep the heart happy. And so please practice daily gratitude. For me, it's something as simple as finding something to be grateful for, because when you have a heart of gratitude, it's kind of hard to complain. It's kind of hard to focus on all the things that are going wrong. And so, try to think of 5 things or one thing, if that's all you got, that you are grateful for. The next strategy is mindfulness. And I know our next presenter is going to talk a little bit more about this. But mindfulness is, just for me, it's spending time alone with yourself and your thoughts and your feelings, and just really having moments of solitude and stillness and being able to live in that moment. And so I encourage you all. I don't have, sometimes the bathroom is my only place of solitude, but wherever I can get it in, I get it in. And so be mindful, be mindful and have moments to be able to be at, to be unified within yourself, body, soul, and spirit. And then helping others. We cannot become so wrapped up in what's going wrong in our lives that we forget that there are other people that need us. And so a good way to also keep the heart happy is to give back and to find someone else that that you can pour back into, that you can encourage. There's nothing like giving an encouraging word to someone when you yourself need one. But it's something beautiful about that. And so we don't want to forget to give back. And I know that you all are a group of advocates and people that are doing amazing work. So your daily work is so imperative. And so I just want to celebrate the awesome work that you are doing on behalf of survivors and their children. And so thank you so much for spending time with me. And lastly, we're going to get through this together. We are going to get through this together. You need other people. We need each other. I need you. You need me. And if we can come together in a sense of unity, then we can get through this together. And so this webinar is that's the message, that together we will get through this. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I just speak blessings over everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gia. Thank you for being a messenger of hope. And like you started off with, like, if nobody gets anything else, you hope they get hope. We got so much more. Thank you for all the gems. I made so many notes. What's your story? What's the story that you're telling yourself? That resonated. What really resonated with me the most is my body, soul, and spirit has language when I don't have the words. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for all the gems that you dropped. And now I'm really excited. Carolina, if you could take it away. Thank you so much again for your time. So I'm looking forward to your presentation as well. Gia, we had a question that came up. I'll wait to the end to bring it up. You touched on the question. But I just want to make sure that I acknowledge Lynette. We saw your question, and I'll pose it to both presenters at the end. Thanks. Carolina, take it away.
Let me just unmute myself. Oh, my goodness. Gia, I feel so much hope and empowerment and validation for all the feelings that we have the right to feel in this moment. So thank you so much for such a powerful presentation. And again, hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Bautista-Velez. Thank you, Arlene, and the staff at the National Resource Center for inviting me today to share with all of you. I am an advocate, as many of you have been in the front lines of advocacy. And yeah, I am so excited to be here with you. So in my presentation today, after Gia's presentation, it comes in a very, I don't know the word to use, but I'm going to lean a little bit more into what she said and how it makes sense in our brain that we share all of that common humanity to react and respond in the ways that we are responding in this moment. So I want us to take a few seconds just to come back. If you would like to close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever feels more comfortable for you in this moment. And just take a deep breath. Breathing in all the hope, the awareness, the understanding that Gia brought to us in this presentation. Breathing in the care and compassion that you might be needing in this moment for yourself. So take that in with every inhale. And with every exhale, take out all the action and the hope and the resiliency and the empowerment that our communities have passed on to us through generations. Breathing in the caring, the soothing, the compassion that we need in this moment. And breathing out all the action and resiliency and empowerment that we will continue moving forward. Thank you all, and whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the presentation. So one of the things that I'm going to focus a little bit more is the part of self-compassion. And that self-compassion, I would like to hear from others if you are aware of that word compassion and how that manifests in your life. So if you would like to use the chat, I would love to know a little bit more from you. What is that compassion? How does it manifest for you? Why is it important in this moment in our life, in our personal life, in the world? So a definition that I brought for you is this compassion, the concern to alleviate the suffering of other beings. Yes, thank you. Some people are sharing being kind to ourselves, the daily practice of recognizing those outside of myself. Yes, thank you. All of these things, compassion, when we talk about compassion, we're talking about not only compassion for others, but compassion for self as well. And I love that you guys are sharing that because that really gets missed in the conversation, that compassion is only for others, but not for ourselves. And something to think about is when Gia was sharing those powerful words, when we think about our clients, right, that we work with, our family members, a friend that comes to us with a difficult situation that they're going through in this moment, our reaction to them is of caring, right? It is the tone of our voice. I am so sorry you're going through this in this moment. We hug, we express that compassion and caring. And also when someone else brings their suffering to us, another thing that happens there is that we tell them that this is not going to last forever. But if I ask you to reflect on when we are the ones that are going through something different, when we are going through something difficult, how do we talk to ourselves? Do we embrace ourselves and say, I am so sorry, Carolina, that I'm going through this in this moment? Or it is okay to be feeling in this way. That voice is not as compassionate as the one that we offer others, right? That voice might be very judgmental. Why am I going through this again? This is never going to go well. I am always thinking that I'm not enough. that I'm not going to come out of this. So when we think about self-compassion, and I think someone brought up that question in the chat, the question is treating ourselves with the same kindness as we will treat a friend when things are going wrong. That is self-compassion. It is different than being selfish. Selfish means that we are doing only this for us and we are not including others in that circle of compassion. But what we notice is that with compassion, we tend to be more compassionate towards others than towards ourselves. And self-compassion means that we just include ourselves in that circle of compassion. That's it. So Kirsten Neff is a professor, a psychology professor in Texas, and the person that came up with a very inclusive definition of self-compassion that has helped me to navigate the complexity of my identities as an immigrant, as Latinx, as queer, as a non-Black person of color in a world that has brainwashed us with anti-Blackness. So this is a tool that I love to share with others because this self-compassion has allowed me to explore these identities and the way that I relate to others in a more compassionate way and responding more strategically outside. So what Kirsten Neff said is that in order to be more self-compassionate, first of all, we need to bring mindfulness. And mindfulness is just the art of being present in this moment, knowing that we are suffering. And the sentence might be, wow, I am really suffering in this moment. I am really struggling in this moment with someone that was commenting before, right? That grieving. I know I'm grieving, but I don't know what I'm grieving. So the first step is that mindfulness, recognizing in this moment that I am not well, that I'm being impacted by everything that is going on in this moment. The second thing is that common humanity, that suffering is part of everyone's life. We experience suffering in different levels, and we experience suffering from different systems, but that is a common humanity. We are not excluded from suffering. And the third thing is the self-kindness. And when we talk about self-kindness, it includes an invitation of action to alleviate the suffering on ourselves and on others. So as advocates, that was very important to me to know because I experienced something that in our field called compassion fatigue. And I would like to know, I was one person very fatigued of all the pain and the systems of oppression, right, that was going around my clients and everything. But it is not really compassion fatigue that we suffer. It is empathy fatigue. Empathy is that we resonate with the pain of others. When we use the self-compassion and compassion for others, when we recognize that there is a moment of suffering and we alleviate that suffering in ourselves, we attend to that suffering in ourselves, we are more qualified, more able to respond to the suffering of others, to the suffering of our clients, of the people around us, of our families. So again, it's not selfish. It is, in fact, the most collective way towards liberation. So I would love to hear from some of you. Why don't we do this? Why, if we know that it is difficult for us, that we have that judgment, right, going on towards us, that we are more empathetic and compassionate towards others, but not towards ourselves, why is it so difficult to do it? I'm going to give a little bit of space for us to reflect on that. Why is it so difficult to include ourselves in that circle of compassion? As Gia was saying, right? To recognize that we are doing what we can with what we have in this moment. Yes, Carla, thank you. We expect ourselves to be perfect, that we don't have role models in our culture, right? It is so much easier, yes, to feel for others. You're not alone for everybody that is sharing cultural pressure. Yes. Seems selfish. Yes. We live in a society where we have been told as women a lot, right? We are supposed to take care of others and not ourselves. As people of color, we are supposed to not express, but accommodate to everything, right? To the mainstream culture, to systems that are around us. Yes, we need to unlearn this. So what I want to bring you is that, this expression from psychologists that I love and I wanted to share with you. Our brain has negativity bias. We are Velcro for bad and Teflon for good. When we think about our brain, first of all, as many of you have said, we have not been taught how to take care of ourselves. We have not given the permission that we matter, and that in order for others to matter, in order for us to not see the other as different and as a threat, we need to be able to come to peace and understanding of all of the complexities and identities that are inside of us. So our brain is Velcro for bad, is Velcro to absorb all the bad that is going around the world, is Velcro to absorb the negativity, is Velcro to seeing the news and say, we're not going to go out of this. What is happening is terrible, or this is a problem that I'm never going to be able to go out. We are wired for this because of our survival brain, because of evolution. With evolution, to be able to survive in the wild, we needed to be alert, to recognize all the bad around us, to be able to respond and not get killed, right? So in order for us to really take a moment to bring the goodness, to think about the hope and the resiliency, to tap into the practices of our ancestors that are the ones that have been keeping us alive through generations, we need to be able to stop. We need to be able to be mindful. Because if we don't stop, our brain is wired to go towards the bad and not embrace the goodness in us. So this is not a class of the brain, but I have found throughout the years that knowing that we are not alone in this, that our brain is wired for threat, we have more permission to recognize the common humanity in each one of us. So when we are under threat, we go, if this is the sample of the brain, from a very reptilian place. The thing is that after that limbic or reptilian brain, we have a mammal brain. And the mammal brain is more of the middle area, right? Where we tap into anger. Gia says something very important, that when someone asks about, what about if we don't recognize it? Gia said, then we need to trust what is in our body. The pre-verbal messaging that is in the middle brain, in our mammal brain, to be able to know our body. Because when this frontal cortex comes involved with our limbic brain, when we flip out the frontal cortex, when we are under threat, when we see our people getting killed, when we are exposed to police brutality, when me as a Latinx recognize the anti-Blackness that we have brainwashed through generations, it is very easy for my frontal cortex to not engage anymore and go into fear, into blame, into the mechanisms of fight, flight, or freeze. So when Gia say tapping into that pre-verbal messaging, we can only tap on that through practices of mindfulness, through practices of healing, through practices that our ancestors have used over generations. I would love to hear what are some of those practices that our generations have used throughout the years, throughout centuries, to be able to go from this fear and threat and bring down the frontal cortex to engage and continue from a more grounded way. So those, I would love to hear from you some of those practices. I know dance, music, mindfulness, painting. What are other things that our communities have used through generations to be able to keep ourselves alive? This is the moment that we can tap into those. Connection with nature, yes, thank you. Prayer, yes. Religion, storytelling, yes. Connection with family, cooking together, yes. All of these examples, reading the Bible and prayer, self-care, as simple as making yourself a priority, yes. Humor, dancing, thank you for sharing. What that does in our brain is that it takes us out from this more primitive brain that keeps us, it serves us very well, right? It informs us of threat. It informs us, right, that violence really happens, that some people, mainly Black bodies, are scared of being outside because of systems of oppression and anti-Blackness. And in order for us, other allies, to be able to come together and protect, we need to come out of this reptilian brain, involve our prefrontal cortex, and respond as an ally. Respond and protect the people that needs to be protected in this moment. So that is just an explanation. I am just trying to see how the responses in the chat. Yes, so I'm going to go back to something that was said in the chat. When we think about self-compassion, most people think that self-compassion or compassionate practices are just soothing practices. Soothing practices, and that they are very inactive. Kristen Ness, in this model of self-compassion, talks about two types of self-compassion. The yin self-compassion, which is the one that when we ask the question to ourselves, what do I need in this moment? We are able to recognize through mindfulness if what we need is, for example, a soothing touch, calming ourselves before responding, more of that soothing yin mechanism. But there is another part of compassion that is the yang compassion. And that yang compassion is the compassion that makes us protect ourselves and protect others. The yang compassion, which is called also fierce compassion, is the one that makes us act in the world against injustice. The yang compassion is the one that makes us say no to an abusive relationship. The yang compassion, as someone was saying, is the one that helps us set up clear boundaries. So this dance of yin and yang compassion, finding the middle ground of when do we need to be soothed, and when do we need to act in the world to protect ourselves, to protect our communities, to motivate ourselves for change. That goes to what Gia was saying. What is the narrative? What is the narrative that we are telling ourselves? Is the narrative coming from what our reptilian basic brain is telling us, that is wired to live in the past or the future? That is what the brain is wired, to live in the past or to live in the future, anticipating for threats. If that is the story that we are believing in that moment, we're not going to be able to bring compassion for us and for others. So that is the invitation to respond from that frame. This phrase, between a stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. I will add what Gia was talking about. That space is our power to choose what we tell ourselves. In that response lies our growth and our freedom. That is where our freedom is. Mindfulness and compassion is not an invitation to be inactive. In fact, it is an invitation to include ourselves in that circle of compassion, to not get burned out by everything that is happening in the world. That is so much. In that space where we take that mindfulness, that is storytelling, that is the freedom to be able to respond in a more grounded, to set up the boundaries that we need, and to tell the story that really we need to hear from us in a moment when we struggle. It is so important also for us women and for us people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, to be able to recognize what we are telling ourselves, because we are bombarded by other people telling the stories about us for us. When we are grounded, we are able to embrace our stories and to come out and recognize that common humanity, that we are not alone. It is, me too. And we're going to stand up and we're going to start telling the stories. We're going to continue practicing, embracing and reclaiming the practices of our ancestors that are so important, has been important throughout history, and in this moment of time is so important for us to continue embracing. I will be able to respond more to the question in later, I think, in the question and answer, but someone is asking who are Black, Indigenous people. There is a term right now that, the word that has been used is people of color, but it is very important to recognize Blackness, the anti-Blackness that also is present within communities of color that are non-Black, and recognizing also Indigenous people. So the term is BIPOC, to make more inclusive of Black, Indigenous, people of color. It's just a term that includes everybody, and also it brings up the identities that are really, really under attack throughout history and the several systems of oppression. So thank you for asking. So what are some practices that I can leave with you to be able to move towards this more self-compassion, towards reflecting more into these stories that we're telling ourselves and others about us? So soothing touch is a practice of self-compassion. And I don't know if I have enough time Arlene or Yvonne to go into this? It seems that we are doing okay with time.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're
great.
okay with
So
time.
I'm okay with time. Perfect. So I would like to invite you to engage in a little practice of finding soothing touch. Why is soothing touch important? Soothing touch is important because our limbic brain, as we were talking, is pre-verbal. So when we talk during moments of suffering, when we are angry, when we are devastated, maybe words don't resonate much in that moment or help us much in that moment when we are suffering. But touch, our mammal brain, pre-verbal brain, responds excellent to that. So when we are feeling that we don't know what is happening, we feel angry, we feel a lot of grieving, this soothing touch is something that you can use. I use it when I am in circumstances where I'm not able to say, oh, let me take a moment of self-care and go away and take a bath with bubbles, right? We need self-care practices that we can use in the moment that we are suffering. So soothing touch, let's practice this. I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze, or you are more than welcome to continue looking at me in the webinar. And just take a deep breath, calming our nervous system, recognizing that it's a lot of information that we are taking in. The breath is a tool that we have available at any moment. We can tap into at any moment to send a signal to our nervous system to calm down. And I would like for you to bring one or two hands over your heart center and just practice putting your hand in your heart. No judgment, no understanding, just feeling. What do I feel when I bring these hands in my heart, when I feel the skin touching my clothes? Is this a gesture that I can use maybe when I'm going through a difficult moment? Just experiment how it feels. Now I invite you to bring your hands around your arm, like if you are giving yourself a hug. And just try to feel if giving yourself a hug in moments of suffering, if you ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? Is that something that you might be able to offer yourself? Does it feel soothing? Now I invite you to bring maybe your hands on your face, around your cheek, like, like a grandparent or someone that is older than you holds your face between their arms, and see if that is a gesture that you could use when you're suffering. You can also practice by putting your hands on your lap and rubbing slowly your thighs. just a small movement. All of this is to be able to say, I'm here for you. The same way that we will tell a friend that is suffering or someone that we see suffering, offering ourselves what we need in that moment. I'm here. So you're more than welcome to open your eyes if you are have your eyes closed, and just come back to the virtual room. That is just a small exercise on bringing ways that we can embrace, what we don't feel, what we cannot give words in moments of suffering. Soothing touch is very, very important. Another thing that I use, I am a consultant on diversity and anti-oppression, and I facilitate conversations that are not very easy in many moments. So soothing touch for me in a meeting or when I'm in front of a client, I will not bring my hand over my heart, but I do hold my hand on my lap. And that sends a message to my brain, I'm okay. Things are going to be okay. Calming my nervous system to be able to engage in my more present way. Thank you for your comments. Yes, the powerful self-touch is very important. And I bring the brain because it is very important to understand that we are not alone on this. Our brains are wired to go into fight, flight, freeze mode, to search for threat around us, to be overwhelmed by all of the things that are happening in this moment. So learning and embracing the practices that we already know, that we just need to reclaim from our ancestors, from our culture, the practices that everybody has been mentioning in the chat, that is our freedom. That is our way for our collective and individual liberation. Another practice is compassionate break. I don't think that I'm going to be able to go through this whole practice in this moment because of time, but I wanted you to read in the quote that I put in the presentation. Be careful how you are talking to yourself because you are listening. We are listening. And this compassionate break practice, what invites us to do is to incorporate the three components of self-compassion. I will have invited you to think, to bring to mind a moment of suffering. It can be that we saw something in the news that was really perturbing and it really affected us. It can be a situation with our partners, with our kids, or with us homeschooling our children now, any situation that is difficult. And using mindfulness to recognize in that moment that we are suffering. Then moving into offering ourselves that we are not alone. Gia mentioned it in her conversation. We are not alone in this suffering. We share suffering with everybody, not the same suffering. I'm not talking about that we share the same suffering because we definitely not. But what I'm saying is common humanity is that suffering is part of this living condition as human beings. And then the third step of offering ourselves the soothing, the yin or the yang of compassion. So those are two tools that we have access to bring to ourselves. I think that they send the presentations to the participants, and in my presentation you will see more information about the resources on mindfulness and self-compassion, some links there. So thank you so much for listening, for engaging in the presentation, for participating in the chat. And I hope that these seeds of knowledge and understanding are really helpful for us to continue doing our part towards a more compassionate world for ourselves, for our families, and for everybody. As closing, a moment of self-compassion can change your entire day. A string of such moments can change the course of your entire life. So may we all remember that and continue moving forward for our liberation and the liberation of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Oh, wow. And several nuggets I got from your presentation as well. The main one is reclaiming the practices of my ancestors, because that is where my freedom is, and it's connected to our collective liberation. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the reminder of that. Before we close out, we had a couple questions. So I wanted to pose the questions to you and Gia. There was two questions for you. Janet had asked, how do we separate our self-focus as selfishness and self-compassion? That's one. And the other question from Janet, if someone has not been raised to feel cherished and worthy, how can they move forward towards self-compassion? Carolina, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I think that I lost connection for one moment. Arlene.
Okay. So
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I'll repeat the question.
Okay, great.
There's two questions for you, and there's one question for Gia before we close out. The one for you, well, two, how do we separate out self-focus as selfishness and self-compassion? That's one. And then the other one is, if someone has not been raised to feel cherished and worthy, how can they move towards self-compassion? So those are the questions for you, Janet. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Janet. Self-focus, when we talk about self-focus, it is more of a perception of self-indulgence, right? It is that example of I am only here for me and I am not thinking about anybody else. What self-compassion calls is for the long term. It's not a self-indulgence process or focus. Self-compassion thinks about the long haul. What am I doing here? What do I need in this moment to respond to my need? Because I know that my need is intrinsically connected to the person in front of me, to society, and to our family. So that is the difference between that self-focus and selfishness compared to that self-compassion. In fact, we practice self-compassion because we know that when we are grounded, when we are more compassionate to ourselves, we can practice that yang of compassion towards others and act in the world.
Ooh, thank you. All right, thank you for that. And Gia, you already touched on the response to the question that was directed to you, but I just want to make sure that you hear it and that I acknowledge Lynn. Can one go from denial straight to depression without experiencing anger or bargaining? So you did respond, but I just wanted you to hear the question that was asked.
Yeah, I think we talked about it being going, not doing them in a cyclical or linear way. So there's definitely a way for someone to go from one stage to another and back again. So it's just, it's different for each person. Definitely.
All right, perfect. So in closing, thank you so much.
Arlene, I think that I didn't, I think there was another question that you asked me I didn't address, of someone asking If someone has not been raised to feel cherished and worthy, how can they move towards self-compassion? We already touched in the brain, right? There is a default network that we have in the middle of our brain that take us to that place of unworthiness, because as the person that asked, we have not been raised to embrace who we are in all of our identities. And the practices that we have been talking about, mindfulness, knowing that mindfulness is not for everybody. So finding your own practice, tapping into the healing practices of the ancestors to see if you can create the space between that stimulus that makes you believe that you are not worth it and the response, the narrative, as Gia was talking, that we respond with towards what society or the people that raised us or other people, family members, have made us believe about ourselves. So it is in that space between that stimulus and the response that we involve the practices that we will be able to tap into self-compassion.
Oh, awesome.
And I want to add to that a tad bit, if it's okay. This is Gia. Just about, the whole Janet's question about not being raised that way and how do we tap in. And I just wanted to add to what Carolina just said. I think we have to do the work of going back to that place. And again, it's a learned behavior. So I just want to stress that it can be unlearned. It's something that you can learn for yourself. And so it may be a process. It may not happen overnight. But this whole idea of being kind and gentle and going through your processes and trusting your heart and all that good stuff is going to be very useful in unlearning this idea of not being worthy or not being, whatever it is. And so I just wanted to also add that it's a learned thing and it can be unlearned. You just have to be willing to go through that process of unlearning it and replacing it with something new. So, affirmations and all that kind of stuff is going to be very helpful in changing that narrative.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you
so much, Gia. Yeah, with intention.
All right. So we have about 3 minutes. So first, I want to thank NRCDV team for just the amazing work. Tech support behind the scenes. Justine is there. Yvonne is providing support. Our Training Institute manager. Brecken is our chat box extraordinaire. That's keeping up with the chat box and everything that's happening there. Angie's on captions. Thank you so much, Angie. And all of our NRCDV staff that contributed to this awesome webinar. And then to our speakers, we have 2 minutes. Any closing words from you, Gia, and Carolina? 1 minute each, and that'll send us on our way with lots of hope. Thank you so much for your practices, your words of wisdom, and your hope. And the last voices that I want to hear would be your voices. So, parting words?
This is Gia. I just want to say thank you all for joining us, and just want to encourage you all to be good to yourself. That's all. Just take care. Do whatever you need to do to be good to you, and I'm sure you all will be good to the world. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you. This is Carolina. Thank you to the National Resource Center, and thank you for everybody that is participating in this webinar today.